Good afternoon and welcome to the SR 520 Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid Project's March monthly construction meeting. My name is Alan Van and I am the Public Information Manager for the Skanska team. Next slide, please. I will be kicking us off today before we dive into some construction updates for you folks. Keeping with tradition, you will be hearing from me and my colleague, Robin Clark, Skanska's community liaison. We are scheduled to go until 1 p.m. today, though it's possible that we may end a little bit early. We have a formal presentation followed by some dedicated time for a Q&A session. Similar to our February meeting, we will be holding on responding to most of the questions until the very end of the presentation. Though if there are questions that we can respond to via the chat, I may go ahead and type out some responses to you or let you know if we will be following up with you via email instead. If we are ahead of schedule and we don't have any questions left in our queue, once we get to the Q&A session, we'll go ahead and give you some time back in your afternoons and go ahead and end the meeting early. But as always, if you have any questions that come up after the meeting ends, feel free to connect with us via our 24/7 hotline or our project inbox. To the right of your screen, I also have some additional meeting information for you about how to use the Q&A function, how to contact us via the project inbox, and then also a QR code to scan to sign up for our weekly email updates. Next slide, please. Similar to the last couple of meetings as well, we do have a representative of Graham here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the Montlake project. Feel free to submit those questions regarding either Montlake or the Portage Bay project, again, using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. And then as a reminder for how to actually participate in today's webinar, you do have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. All attendees will be muted, and we ask that you submit all questions or comments using the Q&A box. All questions, comments are visible to everybody attending the meeting, so make sure that you're not putting any sort of personally identifying information in there. Or any information that you don't want others to see. It will be visible to everybody. If there is anything specific to a property or specific to you that you want to coordinate with us on, feel free to follow up with us via email instead. Next slide. And then right before we go into the rest of the meeting, just want to give a quick overview of today's agenda. So we'll go over the entire project schedule, some of the construction activities that have been ongoing with our tree clearing and vegetation removal, and some of our work trestle construction, talk about some ongoing nighttime construction, a short-term look ahead for April and May, and then our long-term look ahead for 2025. Then following that, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for our formal Q&A session. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Robin to talk about construction.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Welcome again, everybody, to the monthly construction update meeting. And as Alan mentioned, if you guys have questions throughout this meeting, just make sure you put them in the Q&A area and we will get to them towards the end of this meeting. And if there's anything that we can't answer directly in the meeting, we will get back to you guys at some point via email. Sometimes just our questions take a little bit of additional research, especially on my end, to dig into some of our design and construction information. But with all of that said, let's get into the updates. So as you can see right here, we've got a little bit of a new graphic just updated for you guys to check out. This is our project map for the Roanoke Lid and the new Portage Bay bridges that will be replacing the existing 520 bridge across the bay. On the south side, we've got our SR 520 trail that are going to connect, that's going to connect the Lid to the East Montlake side of the Portage Bay, with those new bike and pedestrian connections to the Bill Dawson Trail and some of the local areas on the Roanoke neighborhood side of the project. our project schedule, we are still early into the spring of 2025. Happy solstice, everybody. Earth solstice. Is it solstice or? Oh, I'm blanking. I don't think it's solstice. It's first day of spring. It's the first day of spring. I'm blanking on the term, but it's the first day of spring. Happy first day of spring to everybody. In our construction schedule, we are in the early stages of our construction with our work bridge equinox. Thank you, Chelsea. I'll get my terms right for the next, which is summer solstice. Spring equinox is today. Thank you again. We're in the early stages of our construction for both our work bridge and getting to our Portage Bay Bridge North overall construction. That'll be going through 2027. Just like to point out at the bottom there that we are getting towards the end of our in-water pile driving season, the first season of 5 major seasons that we'll be kind of attacking throughout this construction schedule. And we'll talk about more on those updates here in a moment. All right, getting into some of our current construction activities. So for this month, we have been continuing our impact pile driving in Portage Bay. Most of our work has been during the daytime hours, including Saturdays and Sundays throughout the week. We've also been removing some select trees and vegetation over near the Bill Dawson Trail and Montlake Boulevard area. We've been doing a little bit of flagging for the Bill Dawson Trail around that area, just in short durations, 10 to 15 minutes maximum. And we are getting ready to install some acoustic fence around some of these select areas. We've also been working on some nighttime work under the MPPCNV, our main package construction noise variance for the project, which includes working on the temporary work trestles, the work bridges that, for the nighttime work, we are installing decking and platforms. So we are not doing any pile driving or installation of the piles during the nighttime hours. We're just working on the platforms and basically material loading during those times, but it allows us to kind of continuously work throughout the week. We're also going to be working on some of the tree removals near the Montlake lid. And we've been doing a little bit of bridge sweeping, installation of erosion control protection measures, some utility inspections, and some potholing of utilities and soil conditions around the I-5 area. Here's an overall picture of that map for our construction activities this month. The soil testing there on the west side, some potholing that's been going on near I-5, some street sweeping that we've been doing across 520, just for some general street maintenance, the pile driving that's been occurring during the day across Portage Bay, the work trestle construction that's been kind of occurring across the same area at night, again, just working on that platform and deck top of the work bridge. And then we've had some select tree and vegetation removal for day and night over on the west side, or the east side, excuse me. So getting into a little bit more depth on the pile driving progress for this month, we are again installing our daily goal of between 2 and 8 piles each day. For those of you who are in and around the area, we have, I think, 4 cranes out there directly working on the work trestle itself. And we have one that's working on a similar project adjacent to the work trestle, working just on some extension project of the work trestle itself. The areas in green are part of that progress that you guys see. We have, as of today, 171 piles installed for our overall goal of, I believe, 380 thereabout for this season. Generally speaking, between impact pile and vibratory pile, getting a little bit past the season. We have crews pile driving 7 days a week through the end of the month, and our impact window ends on April 30th. After April 30th, we'll continue with just vibratory driving. Kind of touching a little bit more in that. Again, it ends on April 30th, so May 1st, we will be doing strictly vibratory pile driving up until September of this year, this fall. Between May and September, we will still have cranes and barges out on the water working on those work trestles, and they'll be continuing the vibration pile installation on both sides of SR 520. And they'll be continuing that installation of the temporary work trestle. But again, it'll still be with the vibration hammer to install those piles. So you won't hear any more of the pile driving impacts that you're currently experiencing. And then as we get onto some of the land near Boyer Hillside, we'll resume a little bit of impact pile driving. I don't expect that until later this year, but we'll continue to update you guys as we know more with our schedule and operations. Just a little bit on the difference between some impact and vibratory pile driving. With the impact pile driving, you can see a little bit of an example there on the right in the photo. It's basically a large hammer that hits the top of a steel pile, and it sends a very abrupt sound and sharp force onto the pile, which sends the pile directly into the ground and helps us get the structural capacity that we need for the work trestle. In vibration pile driving, we use a hammer that attaches to the pile, and it basically vibrates or shakes it into the sediment rather than impact hammering it directly into the ground. So you experience more of a vibration than a impacting sound. For the vibratory equipment, you can see the picture on the right. There's a little bit of change there with that hammer attachment that's attached to the longer pile there. One thing that we publicized to folks, and you may have gotten a notice on this, is that we looked into some equipment changes for our vibratory equipment. And what that means is we looked into a test pile operation to change from an APE 200 to an APE 400, which is a different type of hammer. We've been using the APE 200 for all of our work trestle pile driving for the vibration. But this past March 6th, we used a vibratory hammer called an APE 400 to test out what our capacity would be on using that hammer to install and see what capacity we could get and what results we could get with that hammer versus the 200. The reason for that is when we reach April 30th, past our impact pile driving window, something I'll talk about here in a moment is our future construction on a temporary configuration for the eastbound off-ramp to 520 or Montlake Boulevard, excuse me. We will need to have a vibratory hammer that has enough force to be able to give us a good, I guess, vibration and force essentially to install these piles for that temporary off-ramp configuration. It's a bit different from the work trestle because our work trestle only needs capacity for our construction vehicles and our cranes and equipment versus what we have for the temporary bridge, which is going to be traffic going on and off SR 520. So that's kind of what we tested there. We got good results with the APE 400. The big difference is just that the APE 400 vibrates a little bit more forcefully. So it's potentially an experience for more vibrations from that. We've gotten some different feedback from folks regarding our tests from that past March 6th equipment change, but just wanted to run you folks through what that looks like for the future. All right. Kind of jumping into some traffic effects for late March and April. Throughout this March and coming into April, we have a handful of operations that'll be ongoing. We have our nighttime sweeping along the existing Portage Bay Bridge, which is a mobile operation. We have some installation of erosion protection at the Montlake Boulevard on-ramp to eastbound 520. And we have some potholing for utilities and soil conditions on I-5, which will include some lane closures. All of these, again, are either mobile operations, lane closures, or flagging, typically at night to just maintain safety for our own crews and for interface with the public. Jumping into tree removal schedule, something that I've been talking with our folks quite a bit about and with you guys a lot in our last couple of meetings. So we have a tree removal schedule that we continue to target for this late March, which, as you know, we're in late March right now. So we're hoping to start with our larger tree removal here in the next week to 2 weeks. We are starting on the Montlake side of our project with those tree removals. And we'll be then moving over to the west side of our project on the Boyer Hill side, and then up onto the East Roanoke Street side after that. This will allow us to kind of clear those work zones for upcoming work, and then just work through that with our construction activities. So focusing on the Montlake side, since that's where we'll be starting with our operations. We do have crews that have kind of started with some smaller shrub and vegetation removals near the Bill Dawson Trail in order to clear some select areas for erosion control measure installation. They'll be continuing to do that as we get into the larger tree removals here in the next week to 2 weeks. Then we will be, again, getting into the bigger tree removals, as you can see in the photo. A lot of those trees will have to be removed in order to accommodate the work zone for the new Portage Bay bridges. We will have some work during the day, and we're targeting most of our work to happen during the day just for general work hours and noise mitigation. But we do have some nighttime work planned just due to safety concerns and the proximity of some of those trees to the off-ramp and to the eastbound 520 main line. So when that happens, we'll make sure to schedule that, and you guys will get a notice regarding any lane closures and ramp closures that we schedule. Jumping into some other traffic impacts that would come with that. With the proximity of the trees and clearing to the Bill Dawson Trail, it's pretty close there for getting equipment and crews down there to start clearing and removing trees. So we'll have some periodic either short-term closures or flagging in the section that you see on the graphic on the right. We will either have flagging operations or short-term, periodically 1 to 3 day trail closures in order to safely remove the trees and get them either out of the way or just safely placed in a location off the trail. Basically what you can expect is during the flagging operations, we'll pause pedestrian traffic, walkers, bikers, etc. For up to 15 minutes while our crews take down a tree or cross a tree across the trail. And then we'll release traffic essentially to continue on your way. For later in April, when we have 1 to 3 day closures, we'll let you guys know. That can happen for a number of reasons. If we have a lot of those taller trees next to the traffic lanes, we may close that for 1 to 2 days, just again for those safety reasons. Again, we'll let you guys know. Maybe closed for a couple days. We'll have a detour set up for folks to get around the trail, and you guys will be able to follow signage to get to where you want to go. And last but not least, acoustic fence installation. This one's been kind of just following some of our construction activities again. So we are currently looking at an April target for our acoustic fence installation for most of our project locations, starting kind of again on the east side and working our way west across the project. A lot of this is going to be contingent upon when we get to points with our work bridges and with our construction activities so that we can install that just ahead of when those activities begin and make sure everything is installed so that the acoustic fence is doing what it's supposed to. And there is a picture of what the acoustic fence will look like once it's installed. It's actually the fence in black, just to clarify. The green fence is more of a security fence for site operations. All right, kind of a jump to ongoing nighttime work, get a little more detail on that. So March nighttime construction. Again, we've been doing some sweeping on the existing Portage Bay Bridge for some site maintenance. We've had some ongoing lane closures for the 520 on-ramps for just our erosion control measures and to get ready for some of those tree removals. And we've had some lane closures for continuing to build out the temporary work trestle platforms. Or we've had some night work to continue building out the temporary trestle platforms. Our nighttime work is Monday through Friday, 10 to 7. We do have nighttime work on the weekends, 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. And again, we do not do any impact pile installation or frankly, any vibratory pile installation at night so that we don't exceed our nighttime noise allowances. We are strictly working on like basic equipment and material lifting and placement and installation for those decks and platforms. Another good view of our temporary work trestle here. This is kind of an updated progress photo in a sense. On the left, you can see some of those cranes that I mentioned earlier. They're sitting on what we call the deck or the platform of the work trestle. And that's what the crews have been working on day and night to be installing that for us to be able to access with our equipment. There on the right is the pile circled in green. That's the piles that we're installing with impact vibratory equipment. So that's been happening during the day. All right, just a way to kind of stay up to date with nighttime construction and really construction in general. We have again, our monthly construction meetings. If you want to hang out with me and Alan, you're welcome to come hang out with us every month. We also have our rest of the West listserv email updates. We have our notifications, especially to neighbors directly impacted by some of this work. And then we have a QR code right here and an email if you guys want to scan that. We'll have more at the end as well if you don't catch it on this slide. All right, looking at some of our short-term look ahead for April, May, getting closer to the summer solstice, not the spring. Oh no, yeah, spring equinox. Oh man, I almost messed it up again. All right, construction look ahead for April, May. So April, we are going to be continuing through that in-water impact pile driving, and we will be wrapping that up by the end of April. So April 30th, we will be completing all of the impact pile driving for season 1. We are also looking at our closure of the Boyer Stairs on the west side of our project for getting started on utility relocations that I've talked about in some of our previous meetings. We're looking at some of our short-term Bull Dawson Trail closures that I mentioned and some of our acoustic fence installation. Getting into May, again, completing season 1 of in-water work and shifting to vibratory pile installation. We'll be continuing our tree and vegetation removal, more so on the Boyer Hillside and Roanoke neighborhood area. We'll be looking at starting long-term Bill Dawson Trail closure. And we'll be beginning to build our temporary eastbound SR 520 exit to Montlake Boulevard, which I'll again talk about here in a second. Touching a little bit on that utility work near Roanoke Park. As you can see here on the right, we're looking at a couple utility relocations for 2025. Starting here in April, we're looking at a closure of the Boyer Stairs that'll last for up to 5 years. That'll allow us to relocate a water line and a 26 kV overhead line so that we can shift those lines and construct all of the permanent infrastructure for our new project. So to start that out, we'll be working on the water main relocation this spring, in addition to that Boyer Stairs closure. And then we'll be shifting into the 26 kV relocation later this fall. In order to facilitate some of that work, we will have some traffic effects, lane closures on Boyer Avenue and East Roanoke Street coming up this fall. On the long-term Bill Dawson Trail closure, so I mentioned that a moment ago, we are looking here later this spring at closing the Bill Dawson Trail for up to 5 years. The trail will be closed in that area in yellow that you see in the graphic. However, folks will still have access to the Montlake playfield and track. The detours that you see are in blue and orange, and we're working on getting all of this finalized and publicized to folks so that you guys will be able to access everywhere you need to go around where the trail is closed. And we're aiming for essentially a safe, accessible route that avoids highly trafficked areas as best as we can, and aims for more of low speed roadways. So the blue signed detour is going to be aimed for pedestrian routing, and the orange is going to be aimed for bike detours. And then we have the green dotted line is the City of Seattle Neighborhood Greenway. So this is just kind of a map that we'll be getting out to folks. Once we finalize the date for the full closure, that long-term closure, we'll have more to publicize on that. We're still working on the final date, but again, we'll share that with you guys once we get that firmed up. Upcoming traffic shifts. So I've mentioned this a couple times. What you are seeing on this graphic is a temporary configuration of the off-ramp from 520 eastbound to Montlake Boulevard. The existing ramp is there in red. And essentially what we are doing is removing that red portion, the existing ramp, and we'll be creating a new configuration there in blue. We're going to be creating the new configuration first so that the impacts to traffic will be pretty limited for that traffic shift. We're aiming for that traffic shift to be later this year, probably mid-fall. And the aim is to do that traffic shift in essentially a weekend so that the prolonged impacts are not, are pretty limited. That way we're not closing it and then constructing the new temporary ramp. This will allow us to start shifting traffic for some future elements of construction. The reason I say that is just to kind of get you guys in the loop for what's kind of upcoming in those construction portions. One for the vibratory hammer that I mentioned, that'll be used to construct the piles for this ramp, and that'll roll into some more construction activities that we talk about in future monthly meetings as we get into more details of what the construction of this temporary off-ramp is going to look like. So long-term look ahead for 2025, last thing I'll kind of touch on for today. Just some high-level look ahead throughout 2025. We'll again still have our impact pile driving seasons. Season 1 wraps up April 30th, and we'll begin season 2 on September 1st. We'll continue vibratory pile driving throughout the year. and then we'll have some traffic impacts throughout the year as well. We'll give you guys as much notice as we can. And again, all of the notice will go through our typical construction corners, email updates, etc. So please stay in touch with us throughout all of our social medias and everything. We will have utility work on the Roanoke area near Boyer Avenue, and we'll begin our construction of temporary bridge on the temporary bridge and off ramp on the east side of the project. And with that, I will turn it back over to Alan.
Great. Thank you, Robin. We have about 26 minutes left in today's formal meeting. As I mentioned earlier, if we do run out of questions in the queue, we'll go ahead and give you folks some time back in your afternoon. Before I dive into some of the questions that we have queued up, I do want to just reiterate some ways to stay informed about the project. So looking at the screen here, we have our 24/7 hotline, where you'll be able to reach me this week if you have any questions for any sort of construction updates for traffic control or our FAQs as well. We also have our sr520construction.com website, which we commonly call our construction corner. In addition to that, we also have our email updates. We have a couple of QR codes throughout the presentation that you could scan. And then we also have our project inbox with our email that is listed right in the center of the slide here. In addition to that, we also have our monthly construction meetings, such as today. Our April one, we'll be sharing out the date for that in the next couple of weeks. We may see some changes to either the day of the week or the time of these meetings in the future, so make sure that you are signed up for our email updates to be informed for when our next meeting is going to be hosted. With that, we can move on to the next slide and go into our Q&A. As a reminder, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We do have a couple of questions in the queue. As we start responding to questions and you have follow-up questions, feel free to submit them. I will be briefly pausing once the queue is dried up, just to give folks the opportunity to type out their questions. But if there's a couple of moments of silence, we'll go ahead and just end the meeting early. With that, we'll go to the first question from Pete regarding our construction sequencing. Can we confirm the construction sequencing for the trestle construction, the bridge removal, and the bridge rebuilds?
Yes. Pete, I see you've got it broken out here to essentially the work bridges will be constructed on both sides of the current bridge. Then the north span will be constructed first. The current bridge will be demolished and the south span will be constructed. And essentially you've got it. That is the construction sequencing that we're going for. There are some, again, nuances into that, but from a high level, that's exactly it. We'll try to condense down some things here and there. We may have some work on work bridges as the north span is being worked on, but for the most part, that is exactly the construction sequencing there.
Related to that as well, Connor has a question about the temporary work trestles, if they're going to eventually turn into temporary car travel lanes. I do want to attempt to take over the screen for a second and share an animation that we shared at our in-person open house last summer that explains the construction sequencing just a little bit more. So give me a little bit of time. Let's see.
And while you pull that up, Alan, I'll help with that. The work trestles will not turn into temporary car travel lanes. However, they will be separate from the existing 520. Typical rush hour commutes will not be heavily affected when we're working on the bridges. The overall project and essentially the purpose of the work trestles is for us to have the least amount of impact on current traffic as possible. there will be some traffic shifts that we do over several weekends for the next couple of years. But there's not going to be any prolonged period of time where we take lanes or ramps or sections of the bridge that would take away from what the current traffic capacity is, in a sense.
Great, thank you, Robin. It appears that screen sharing is an issue on my end, but Pete and Connor, I do think that this animation would be really helpful for the two of you to see. So we'll follow up with you via email and send you a link to the animation. The next question is also from Connor. Will there be any extensive bike lane closures on SR 520 besides the typical weekend closures?
Extensive bike lane closures on 520. We will have the bike lane closure of the Bill Dawson Trail, and maybe Dakota, you can flip back to that slide real quick. Just the long-term Bill Dawson Trail closure will be our major one for pedestrians and bikers. But as far as from 520 Montlake Lid area going across Lake Washington, we're not anticipating any closures there. Really, I don't believe there's any bike connection from the current 520 access from Montlake Lid to the Roanoke Lid area. So we don't have any impacts necessarily right there. But what you're seeing here on the screen in yellow is really the major impact that you're going to experience during this project. So here in the next few months, when we dial in a date, that section in yellow with the X's across will be closed for about 5 years.
Great, thank you, Robin. Our next question is from Gerald. When does the new viaduct become operative, replacing the 10th Avenue East Viaduct and the Delmar Drive East Viaduct? This is a topic that we did not cover during this presentation. It is something that we had mentioned previously at other presentations. So if folks want to learn a little bit more about the question that Gerald is asking, we can go ahead and send out the previous presentations, but I'll pass it over to Robin to talk about it at a high level for now.
Yeah, I'm gonna test my recollection here. I believe so we're gonna have a kind of a temporary configuration and then a permanent configuration of the viaducts here. And I'll use interchangeably viaducts, but also the crossing bridges for 10th and Delmar. So we'll construct a temporary bridge configuration in between 10th and Delmar during our Roanoke Lid construction. And that'll allow us to eventually remove 10th and Delmar. I anticipate, again, off the top of my head, the temporary bridge configuration would be open and in configuration in the 2028 timeframe. Off the top of my head, I may be making a mistake on that, but I'll double check. And we can talk about that more maybe in our next meeting. And then what we would do is have that configuration open in that 2028 timeframe, remove 10th and Delmar, reconstruct the new 10th and Delmar in addition to the rest of the Roanoke Lid, the new Roanoke Lid. We would then remove the temporary configuration and switch traffic back to the new 10th and Delmar, which are going essentially in the same location as the current 10th and Delmar. And that would be by the end of our project in the 2030 timeframe.
Yeah, and for folks who may be attending our meeting for the very first time and may not be super familiar with what we're talking about with this temporary overpass, please do not hesitate to reach out to us and we can send you some additional information to provide some context for this question and response. Our next question that we have is from Michael. Is there any attempt to limit pile driving on weekends and specifically Sundays, especially in the morning? Giving local residents at least one period of quiet or break during the week.
I could definitely commiserate here. Our crews are working 7 days a week, including the pile driving. We've attempted up until the last couple weeks here to go as long as possible without working weekends. It's not ideal for us either, because it's additional work hours. And we don't like to work weekends as much as anybody. But we do need to continue this in order to make sure we're meeting what we need for this impact work window, and staying on schedule and getting all of the piles installed that we need to for this season one. I don't know from the operations standpoint what limits they are making on the weekends and on Sundays. I do know that start times differ from the weekdays so that they don't start until 9 a.m. Versus weekdays are 7 a.m. But unfortunately, I believe the operations are going to continue up until that April 30th date.
Great. Thank you, Robin. And just to build on top of that a little bit too, um, in terms of our pile driving schedule, we do want to make sure that we're being good neighbors with you folks. We are limited to working up until 5 p.m. regardless of which day it is, whether it's a weekday, weekend, or legal holiday. If you find that our subcontractors are out there working past 5 p.m., please give us a call at our 24/7 hotline and we'll be able to investigate that. Let's see. Sorry, let me pull up the Q&A box again. We do have one other question from Connor. Why is there a seasonal limit on pile driving? Is this for environmental reasons or mainly due to increased marine pleasure traffic?
Primarily environmental reasons. I don't know the full history on it, but when you have impact pile driving, it typically creates more of a plume of sediment because it's creating a big impact on the sediment below the water. So there's a plume of kind of that sediment that comes up from the ground, versus the vibration is more light and loose on the ground. So there's less plumage. We do have other underwater measures that create that plume from dissipating further out from our site. So we have a bubble curtain, which is a fancy way of just saying like a bunch of bubbles that contain our sound underwater and our plumage, as well as a erosion control boom that contains any turbidity. But the salmon migration between April 30th and September 1st is why we're not allowed to do the impact pile driving.
Great. Thank you, Robin. It looks like we don't have any questions left in our queue currently, but I will pause for a brief moment just in case anybody has any new questions or any follow-up questions. If I don't see anything submitted in the next minute or so, then we'll go ahead and end early, but I'll go ahead and pause briefly. And as a reminder too, you can go ahead and submit questions via the project inbox as well. Let's see, I see a request from Pete. Please review the early slide about sequencing. I believe this may be the schedule slide. Dakota can go back to the early slides.
Slide 7.
Robin, do you want to walk us through some of the details listed here?
Yeah, I can go over this real quick. So from a high level, we have the Portage Bay Bridge North, removal of the existing bridge, and then Portage Bay Bridge South. So that's kind of our sequence there, 1, 2, 3, that you mentioned there, Pete. And then on the very bottom there, you have the in-water pile driving seasons. There's a little bit of nuance in that with our work bridges that gets sequenced into each of the seasons. The biggest being this first season, our work bridges are being installed um, basically from the east and west ends all the way across to make sure we have the ability to go up and down the alignments that we need to access these areas. But we also have these kind of extensions we call them fingers of the work bridges, the work trestles, to allow our cranes to access where the future foundations of the bridges will be. And some of those fingers we won't be able to access until about season 3 or season 4 of the in-water pile driving seasons, just because of where they sit with the current SR 520 bridge. So part of that won't happen until later in our project. So that's why you kind of see additional pile driving later in our sequencing. But overall, the primary work bridge will be installed now and then removed in that season 5 timeline. We also have the Roanoke lid construction there from 2025 to 2029, and then our landscaping urban aesthetics, which includes really street improvements, sidewalk improvements, going from 2027 throughout 2030.
Great, thank you, Robin. In addition to some of the information that we've shared regarding the in-water impact pile driving, Gerald is curious how significant the on-land pile driving is going to be.
The pile driving that'll continue on land, primarily for this year will be with temporary bridge 1, which is the extended off-ramp configuration to Montlake Boulevard. That will be with our vibratory hammer change. So the sound impact will not be significant. It'll be potentially some vibration changes from changing the hammer types, but no impact pile driving for that on the east side. On the west side, I am working with our operations team to understand what the details are for pile driving on land in the future, but I don't expect any significant impacts, I guess, pun intended. Sorry, bad joke for this year. But I'll get some more details on that for you guys.
Thank you, Robin. It looks like we don't have any other questions in our queue. I'm going to give it until, or at least one more minute for any additional follow-up. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and end early. So we'll sit tight just for one more moment, and then yeah, we'll see what comes in. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys for the good questions.
If there are also responses that may need additional clarification or again require additional follow-up, feel free to send us an email. We'll go ahead and respond to any additional follow-up that you may have.
Or if you think of something in the meantime.
And while we're waiting for additional questions to trickle in, Dakota, could you move forward over to one of the last slides for where to find our meeting recordings? Oh, Carl has a question. What is the timing for building the walls along Boyer Avenue East?
Great question. Let's see. Timing on walls along Boyer. So we are starting our utility work here this year. That will sequentially roll into our ability to work on those walls along Boyer once we get the 26 kV overhead line relocated. Then I believe that kind of allows us to work on those walls. So I think we're looking at very late this year, early next year to start on that wall installation.
Yeah, and as we make progress on construction in that area as well, the best way to stay informed of those updates is to continue attending these monthly update meetings. We'll also be hosting several open houses this summer as well. More details to be shared via our project email list. Yeah, we'll be sharing more information on that as we get closer. I am not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A queue. So with that, thank you everybody for attending today's meeting. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded. We'll go ahead and post the recording on our construction corner that you can see here. There's a screenshot. You'll see a beautiful photo of the existing Portage Bay Bridge, but if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, you'll see a recording of the meeting and a copy of the presentation. Again, if there's anything that requires any follow-up or if any questions come up in the meantime before our next meeting in April, feel free to send us an email or call our 24/7 hotline. But thank you again for attending, and we will see you all next month. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, guys.